Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the delay. I'm Bob Hansen, Senior Associate Dean here at the Tuck School and Professor. Welcome, everyone, to Tuck. Particularly, I see a lot of undergraduates out there, and I want to warmly welcome you down to Tuck if you haven't been here before, and to say that we hope to see you back here in the MBA program or in the Bridge program in the summer. Welcome to Tuck again, and to this very special event, which is going to be with Elouise Cobell and Bruce Dutu, and really a conversation between those two and with the audience as well. I want to say a few words of introduction for Elouise Cobell and Professor Dutu, and then I'm going to turn it over to Professor Dutu to continue with some more information. But let me start with Elouise Cobell, who's a member of the Blackfeet Nation from Browning, Montana. She's got an honorary doctorate from Montana State University, and she received one of the MacArthur Foundation's very prestigious Genius Grants back in 1997. She's currently the executive director of the Native American Community Development Corporation, which is an affiliate of the Native American Bank. She's perhaps most widely known and respected for her role as the lead plaintiff in Cobell versus Salazar, a class action lawsuit filed in 1996 against the federal government for its mishandling of individual Indian money accounts. And that's going to be, of course, a great topic of conversation today. It was just about a year ago that a settlement in that case was announced, with the government saying that it intends to pay $3.4 billion in claims. I'm not sure that any of that money has been released or seen yet, as is typical. Ms. Cobell has been recognized by many people and institutions for her tireless work in addressing and correcting many of the injustices endured by Native Americans. She's received a Cultural Freedom Fellowship from the Lannan Foundation, the J. Silverheels Achievement Award from the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development, and the AARP Impact Award for making the world a better place. She had to make special arrangements with the judge today in that case that I mentioned, so that she could come to be with us today. And for that, Elouise, and for everything else that you've done, I want to thank you and welcome you again to Dartmouth and to Tuck. Joining Elouise and really serving as an interviewer in the grand tradition of what we call fireside chats at the Tuck School.
We need a fire right now.
We need a fire. We could use a fire today. Is Professor Bruce Dutu. He is the Samson Occam Professor of Native American Studies. And if you know some history of Dartmouth College and the history of Eleazar Wheelock and Samuel Occam, you'll know that that's a very prestigious chair to hold. It goes way back into the history of Dartmouth College. And the Native American Studies program at Dartmouth is a very important part of the college. And since coming to the college in 2008, Professor Dutu has done a lot to make it an even more intellectually exciting and vibrant program for faculty and students alike. So Bruce, thank you and welcome to Tuck, and I'll turn it over to you to get the conversation started. Welcome and thank you again, both of you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Is this mic, I guess you can hear now. All right. Please proceed to continue eating your lunch. We'll talk right over you. Let me just say, at the end of our Q&A, we're going to turn it over for questions from the audience. There is a mic, we only have one microphone, that we'll pass around to make sure that we capture your comments and your questions for the recording. This is very important for those of you in my Native American Studies 25 class who are not able to be here. That way we'll capture all of this so that when you replay this or watch it again, you'll get everyone's feedback. As Dean Hansen pointed out, we're greatly honored to have someone who really is a living heroine to many of us and a leading figure in the world of Indian country today, Elouise Cobell. As he also pointed out, she's here despite having been hailed to Washington for a court hearing, another update on the Cobell case, to join us here. So I applaud her commitment to be with us today. I'm not going to repeat all of the wonderful information, the biographical information that is in the pamphlet and what Dean Hansen has already said. You've read this. You know that we have a very, very accomplished individual here. But before we get to the Cobell case itself, which will comprise most of the questions, I wanted you all to know that Ms. Cobell's background includes a background in banking and a founder of one of the first banks located in Indian country. So I wanted to, since we are talking about finance and economic development in Indian country, is give Ms. Cobell just a few minutes to talk a bit about that part of her early career and ongoing efforts in terms of bringing economic development to Indian country. So Elouise, if I can ask you, what led you into Indian country banking in the first place?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for having me here today. It's a pleasure. I've never been to Dartmouth, and this is a great experience for me. And thank you all for coming, and I know we're going to enjoy our time together. Well, back in 1982, I was the treasurer for the Blackfeet Indian Nation, and all of a sudden, the FDIC came in and closed the existing bank in our community. And this bank was not owned by any tribal people. It was owned by non-Indians, but the FDIC came in and closed it as a result of poor management. And all of a sudden we had a town meeting that night on talking about, what do we do? We don't have a financial institution, and I think the writing was on the wall is that, all of the business would go off reservation, and our little community would dry up and blow away. And so we just could not let that happen. And so they sort of made me one of the lead people to go out and talk to other financial institutions about starting bringing in a branch, and branch banking was prohibited in the state of Montana at that particular time. We found out, like Malmstrom Air Force Base, they're on federal property, and they had a branch, so how did they get around that? And so I went that process and tried to find out every avenue that we could to bring the financial institution. And finally, talking to these other financial institutions in the 80s was very hurtful, because many of the bankers that I would talk to would say, well, Indians don't pay their bills. There's no way we can collect money on, if I wanted to start a bank, I would start it in a prosperous community. Why would I start a bank in an Indian community? And so it got you to the point where your blood was boiling, and it's like you had to do something. So went back to the tribe and reported, there's no way we can get another financial institution to start a bank here. So we're going to have to start our own. And so I guess needless to say, everybody always commented that we probably had the most complex 1,200,000 charter that ever existed. So it's just because it was like that thick. I hand carried it to the controller, the deputy controller in San Francisco, and says, here's our charter application, and we want to start a bank. I remember his exact words today, and he said, I'm going to tell you something, that if you fail on this endeavor, that you're going to take every single tribe down with you. What a great responsibility you had when you walked out of that room. But and I'm sure all of you are like me, is that when you bite your teeth, you're kind of like a Wolverine. When you bite your teeth into something, you're just not going to let go. And so in 1987, we opened the doors of Blackfeet National Bank, and it was one of the first banks ever chartered, nationally chartered on an Indian reservation. Of course, we had to, develop all the commercial codes, foreclosure codes, but we did it. And now today, the bank was purchased by Native American Bank, who several of the tribes that are in this room are investors. And so now it's grown to the next level. So,
can I ask, how has the economic downturn impacted the local bank as well as the National Native American Bank?
Well, we suffered like all the other banks. Of course, you know, we had to scrub our credits and over, and but we dealt with it, and we stayed alive, you know, and that's more that you can say on several fronts in the banking world, is that a lot of people didn't survive through these terrible crises. But I think that what it reflected is the fact that there's a lot of good loans in Indian country, very good loans in Indian country. And the majority of the loans that we had to deal with that caused us issues in Native American Bank is when we went out and participated with other banks on non-Indian loans. And that got us into some trouble. But you know, we dealt with it. We're working very hard right now to continue to capitalize and grow the bank, and so it's a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Are there things that are unique about tribal banking in terms of its practices?
Well, you know, I think an important factor too is that the investors of Native American Bank, and in the morning session we talked about, I mean, in many of the sessions talked about people coming together in collaboration, and that's what Native American Bank was about. It's like, it has 26 investors and people coming together and collaborating and learning more about each other and what part of the country and their economy, and how do you make these deals, these backroom smoke-filled deals that, you know, and it works. You know, a tribe will say, oh, well, you know, we're working on this. Are you interested? Will you come together? Like the forefighters presentation that we had before, it's a very good experience on helping tribes each other with the economy. But I think that the Native American Community Development Corporation, which is the nonprofit arm of Native American Bank, is really valuable because there's a lot of capacity building that has to be done. And in the last session, I heard that, you know, what did we do with our gaming money? You know, we didn't invest it in other things that are going to help our economy, you know, and it went off to other places. Well, I think the Native American Community Development Corporation is a prime example how we really work with communities on their capacity building for individual Indian people, for entrepreneurial people, for young people. We have one of the greatest financial literacy programs for young people that exist. We started all these mini banks in the schools, and the students learn how to save, and they actually use the bank and have their own savings account. We teach them all about careers in banking. We bring them to the bank, and they know everything about the bank. So we're learning, teaching at a very early age finance, and it's amazing when you listen to these young people talk about finance. I mean, they've got it, you know. I mean, they'll give you a call and they'll go like, what are you doing? You know, we don't understand how come we have 0.05 interest rate. What's that all about, you know? And, you know, so it's like, what's the APR? I mean, they're asking you all these questions, and it's a wonderful opportunity. The other initiative that we work very hard on is small business development. How do we promote small business development in Indian communities? And for instance, we have a $35 million bridge going through the Blackfeet. And so we're working with all the small businesses, subcontractors, people that are going to be creating businesses from this huge project. It's going to be like a boom city. So there's going to have to be food service, hotels, RV parks, plus all the specialized labor that goes along with it. So we're right in the midst of that in developing workforce development, in promoting small businesses. You know, how can we assist small businesses to make them successful? What we've been able to do is actually look at businesses that are struggling. You know, maybe businesses that are not new businesses, but have been in the community and are struggling, but you know that there's such a need for that business. So bring in the consultants. You know, we worked with the grocery stores. We brought in a grocery consultant. We brought in consultant on assisting them with their accounting, setting up their accounting system, their inventory system, et cetera, et cetera. So that, that's a very crucial. We're building the capacity of individual Indian people, because I think the individual Indian people have to be able to have that capacity for the entire tribe to be healthy, for understanding the economy. And I think, the work that all of the business students here that are planning on and maybe ending up back in their communities, be ready. It's really hard. I call it work in the trenches, because it's very difficult, hard work, but it is the most rewarding work that you'll ever do in your lifetime. When you see kids graduating from high school with $7,000 saved because of odd jobs they've had. We're not a wealthy tribe, so we don't pay huge per capitas, but their birthday money, and they graduate from, and they have $7,000 saved. I mean, that's incredible. You get very excited about that. And when you see a business, being very successful, and I remember giving a talk, and there's just little small things like that that get you so excited about building your community economy. And I said, gosh, we even have a subway. And somebody said, really? Where does it go? Yeah, I was so excited about our little subway. But I think one of the other initiatives that we work on is helping farmers and ranchers with finance and credit. Because in the majority of Indian country, you see a lot of lands, Indian lands, that are leased out to non-Indians, and non-Indians are working the lands. And although that Indian farmers and ranchers would love to do it, they just don't have the finances to work their own land. So this is an opportunity that we work with farmers and ranchers, help them get credit, help them understand what are those federal programs out there that you can qualify for. Don't get terrified of all the finances and the forms, that you need to fill out, financial forms. Just try to make it real easy for people. And
Are these the tribal members you're describing?
Tribal members,
Yeah.
yes. Okay. It's always been very difficult for tribal members to access under the USDA. That's why there's two huge lawsuits, the black farmers and Indian farmers, against the Department of Ag. But working with them and understanding how they are part of the entire process of accessing capital and credit from different areas, even banking. And so that's a great, we also are involved in helping tribes buy back land that has gone to non-Indian ownership. We have a great home mortgage program where we worked with the 184 program, which is 100% loan guarantee. I mean, how could you go wrong if you're a bank and you have 100% loan guarantee for homes? And so we worked on finessing that to make it very user-friendly for all Indian people. So those are some of the capacity building that we've done with Native American Community Development Corporation. And then we raise money by grants. So we're not a drain on the bank.
When you mentioned the curriculum on the banks, the mini banks in the schools, it reminded me years ago we had a scholar here by the name of Frank Pommersheim. Some of you may know Frank. He's a lawyer and a law professor, but he's also a tribal Supreme Court justice for two Indian tribes in South Dakota, Cheyenne River and Rosebud. And he mentioned when he was here at a conference that the teaching of federal Indian law should begin in 3rd grade. Because he says if young folks are only hearing about tribal sovereignty when they get to college or to law school, native or non-native, it just doesn't seem very real in terms of a concept, let alone a reality. And it seems to me that that advice would go for many of the things that we're talking about today, are ways to develop and inculcate an approach, curricular approach for those of the students going into higher education or primary school education. There are ways to dovetail the kind of capacity building that you're describing and bring that into the schools as educational models as well.
And, you know, we have an adult financial literacy program because we work with TANF clients and getting them prepared for the workforce. And
you describe what TANF means for those?
It's Temporary Needy Family Assistance. It's a welfare program when people are out of work. And in that particular program, we developed IDAs, individual development accounts, so that we would put so much money into a savings account for them, but then they would add to that. And that is really successful. And, you know, it was surprising to me to find that many people in our community had never been in a bank, had never, ever been in a bank. And, you know, maybe people will go in and cash a check or cash a check somewhere else, but they didn't bank. And so now we have people that are saving, you know, TANF client, well, and it shocks me that, you know, a mother of 4 children could save $100 out of her check and add to her account. But it's happening, and they're learning about how important it is to spend the money in your community. And I think that by having an economic engine like a bank in your community is that, you know, it really instills in people how important it is to support other businesses.
We may have some more questions about your banking background when we open it up for Q&A, but I want to transition to Cobell versus Salazar. And let me just to give you a sense of how long this case has been going on. This case has outlived 3 presidents. It is now into its 3rd president. It began during the Clinton era and has gone through 4 Department of Interior secretaries, beginning with Babbitt, going through Gail Norton, Kempthorne, and now Salazar. So as the pleadings have been filed in this case, the defendant kept changing. And some folks, including when I taught at the law school, would wonder, is this a different lawsuit? No, it's still the same lawsuit. It's just that it keeps going and on and on and on. But Cobell has stayed in the front lead here and carrying on the good fight. And my first question, Elouise, to you is, what prompted your involvement early on the issue of mismanaged trust assets? I remember in an interview you did last December on NPR on the Diane Rehm show, you mentioned that there had been a number of steps that you had tried before resorting to litigation, trying to get other kinds of legislative attention to this issue. But what brought you into this issue in the first place?
Well, I think it started when I was very young because my parents lived on the Blackfeet Indian Nation, and people would gather. You know, we didn't have TV, telephones, nothing. So people would gather and they'd talk about, you know, if I could get my money, I'd buy my children some school clothes. If I could get my money, and I think that I was like very young, like 5 years old, and I kept thinking in my mind, how come they can't get their money? Why can't people get their money? And, you know, they would come and say, you know, Pleat, that was my dad's name, could you help me? You know, and it was just, and then I became the treasurer of the tribe, and I once again started looking at simple statements. Just, you know, you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. And first began in the tribal situation where I couldn't make any sense of the statements that were coming in on their tribal trust funds. Putting that aside, individual Indian people would come to me and say, can you write a letter? I need my money from the agent. Could you write a letter for me? And I'd write letters. I had a lot of empathy for our people, and it was always just, they'd never return letters, they'd never answer, you know, you never ever, I was an account holder at that time, never got an account statement, and so you knew something serious was wrong. And then when we continued to work together, there was like 5 tribes that really banded together and said, you know, we've got to do something about this. And I just always remember this congressman from Oklahoma. His name was Congressman Salazar. And he is like one of the heroes. He passed away of brain cancer, but he was right in the government's face. He'd hold these hearings and he'd make them stand up and swear under oath that they would tell the truth. So all of a sudden, we forced him to issue an RFP to do an accounting on tribal trust accounts, individual Indian trust accounts, and it was for a reconciliation audit and a certification of all the Indian accounts. Well, they hired Arthur Anderson, and early on, Arthur Anderson went out and came back and said, as far as the tribal accounts go, we can only go from, and that was like in 1992, we can only go back as far as 1972 because the records are in such a mess. And forget the individual Indians, forget them, because you're going to have to just put that on the back burner because that's going to cost millions and millions of dollars. And all I could think about when they gave that report is the people at home, the people that had waited and needed their money so badly, and yet they were saying, oh, you know, just stick that in the back burner, you know, shove it under the rug, forget it. Because individual Indians were underrepresented, they just felt that they could get away with, you know, taking their money. And so tribes, of course, by that time had several attorneys and accountants, and so they could take their issue on themselves, but individual Indians could not. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the deep pockets, and I had traveled throughout Indian country, not just on Blackfeet Bend and Navajo, several times, and just seen the effects of what was happening is like oil wells would be pumping and they'd be polluting water, and you know, people wouldn't get any money. And I remember this lady, we brought her in to testify from Navajo, Mary Johnson, and so these oil wells, 2 oil wells are pumping right above her house, and then they were polluting a little stream that she had for her sheep and killing her sheep, and so they weren't getting any money. So she said her and her husband took their little toolbox, went up there and shut everything off. Shut the whole well down, all the wells down. And geez, by that, she said all kinds of BIA police and all kinds surrounded them. You know, they couldn't get them to do anything about the pollution and not getting any money, but once they shut the oil company down, you know, they had all kinds of attention, and policemen were surrounding them. But, you know, people at home, we have a lot of oil and gas at home, and they're living in shacks and oil wells pumping, and so it really didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that something seriously was wrong. But what I did is I went around and I decided, I was such a Pollyanna, I just can't believe it. It's like I thought, you know, if I can only have somebody listen to me, if I can only get to the president, or if I can get to somebody, I would, you know, so I knocked on administration doors, and, you know, nobody would meet, nobody would talk. I finally got the attention of, when I started this whole process, was the old Bush administration, and he had a deputy commissioner of Indian Affairs who was Native, Dave Matheson, he was from Idaho, and so he let me have a meeting with him. I went in and I told him, we really have a problem here. I said, you know, we've got, they can't get any accounting to individual Indians, blah, blah, blah. I told him the whole story. And he said, you don't have to tell me. My grandparents, my parents have the same issue. And he said, let's get a meeting going here. So he got a meeting with the deputy of OMB. And the deputy of OMB said, you know, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe that we have billions of dollars that's not being accounted for. This can't be happening. And we both said, you know, if I would have said it by myself, you know, he wouldn't have listened. But it just happened to happen that the deputy commissioner was there and reinforcing everything I said. So, gosh, I thought, man, we have a real breakthrough here. And then the old Bush administration went in, and the Clinton administration came in. I go, yes, we are in good shape here with the Clinton administration because, you know, they take up for the poor people and the underserved. And man, Secretary Babbitt would not even open his doors to talk to me. But just fortunately, I had this opportunity to talk with the Attorney General, Janet Reno, and I were doing a keynote talk together in Washington on Indian banking. So they sort of put us in this holding tank before taking us on stage. So I used every moment of it to talk to her about what was happening with our trust funds. I said, you know, you've got a real serious problem here, Miss Attorney General. There's billions of dollars that are owned by Indian people that are not being accounted for, and the government's liable. You have to do something about it. And she said, well, Elouise, go home, write me a letter for a meeting, and let's try to get a meeting together. Well, by that time, I knew the ropes, you know. You write a letter, they're not going to answer you. But what I did is I called every single day. I was right in their face, you know. So I called it. This is our Attorney General's office. You know, of course I can't talk to her, but, you know, when's our meeting? Are we going to have a meeting, you know? And I just did constantly until they finally set a meeting up. So I went into Washington, and I remember going to the Department of Justice, and I walked in this room. It was probably about half of this, and it was all attorneys. Department of Justice attorneys, Department of Interior attorneys, Department of Treasury attorneys, and I just couldn't believe it. And the fellow that was running the meeting, he said, now Elouise, don't come in here with any false expectations. And I just got so angry. I just said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. I said, every day people are dying in our communities that need their money. And you're telling me don't come in here with false expectations. So I walked out of there and I said, you know, this is the last meeting that I'm ever going to have with the government, the administration. I got to sue them. I'm going to sue them. The only problem was I didn't have any money, you know, and that was the problem. So just fortunately had this great connection with a bunch of women. I was on the board of Women in Philanthropy out of New York, and they just got really involved. In fact, every time I would come in and to one of the board meetings, we had this ritual of, you know, what's happening in your personal life, what's happening in your professional life. Well, mine bled together, you know. My whole life was, you know, what was happening with the trust case, and they were, it wasn't the case at that time, but, and they would say, you should sue them, Elouise, you know, and whatever, and so I always tell people that it was this group of women and men, and our whole focus was to provide additional funding for women and girls. And but every time I came in, it was like I was more popular than the survivor on TV. You know, you have to. Everybody was like, "Tell us what's happening. Tell us what's happening." So when I got ready to sue, I called a few of them, and they pulled a group of philanthropy people in that had social justice, and you know, not to say anything about tribes because it's sort of a different cut with individual Indians and tribal issues, and so we had not gotten one penny from tribes on this case. But I remember when we had the meeting and went in and explained it to the philanthropy people, one foundation said, you know, I'll give you a $75,000 grant and a $600,000 PRI, which is a program-related investment, like a loan, and then others were considering it. So I walked out of there and said, all right, well, let's go file the lawsuit. And so on June 10th, you know, is when I went into Washington, and I went in the weekend before to be prepared, and I remember taking the walk over by the Lincoln Memorial and looking down at total government at the Capitol at the very end. And gosh, I just got goosebumps all over, and I go like, I can't do this, I'm too scared. I'm too scared. It's like, oh my God, I'm suing the United States government, you know. And so I dashed back to my hotel, and I picked up the phone and I called a friend, and my friend said, well, Elouise, if you don't do it, who will? You know, and I thought about that for a second, and I thought, you know, that's right. This abuse has been going on from 1887, and it's too long. And so that was the only time that I second-guessed myself. And from that period on, it was, you know, full force ahead. Had to raise all the money for the case. We're out of money, by the way. And then, of course, we went into the settlement. 14 years of litigation. A lot of them were deviations where the government start destroying all the documents, individual Indian records, and we had a protective order over them, and they start destroying them, and Secretary Babbitt and Secretary Rubin were both held in contempt of court. You know, and you never heard anything about that, but they were held in contempt of court for destroying documents. They weren't punished, though. That's the big problem, I think, that if this was the private sector and you stole all this money and mismanaged all this money and couldn't account for this money, a lot of people would be in jail. But not in this situation, when it's the United States government and they're managing money, and it's our money. And I always say, what's the difference between brown money and money? You know, it's because it's ours, that's, you know, it's not the same standards. And so it was a long litigation. We had contempt trials. We had IT security trials where the issue was that the special master was appointed in our case and found out that anybody could hack in to the system. Hacked into the system, created his own IIM account, moved land assets over to that account, moved money over to that account, and absolutely nobody found it. But that's how easy. They had absolutely no firewalls, nothing to protect our assets. And so...
Can I ask one piece here? You mentioned the case is filed. Some folks in the audience may know that the judge assigned to the case was Judge Royce Lamberth. And as Elouise is describing the facts as they become known to the public, I'm going to read you just a portion of Judge Lamberth's last opinion because he was removed from the case by the Court of Appeals. The government argued that Judge Lamberth had essentially lost all objectivity because he was, as you said in one of your earlier interviews, he was speaking truth to power. Well, here's some of what Judge Lamberth actually wrote in 2005. For those harboring hope that the stories of murder, dispossession, forced marches, assimilationist policy programs, and other incidents of cultural genocide against the Indians are merely the echoes of a horrible, bigoted government past that has been sanitized by the good deeds of more recent history, this case serves as an appalling reminder of the evils that result when large numbers of the politically powerless are placed at the mercy of institutions engendered and controlled by a politically powerful few. It reminds us that even today our great democratic enterprise remains unfinished. And it reminds us finally that the terrible power of government and the frailty of the restraints on the exercise of that power are never fully revealed until government turns against the people. And then his sort of coup de grace. Our modern, and he puts modern in quotation marks, our modern Interior Department has time and again demonstrated that it is a dinosaur. The morally and culturally oblivious hand-me-down of a disgracefully racist and imperialist government. This is a federal judge writing all of this, appointed by Richard Nixon, I believe. That should have been buried a century ago, the last pathetic outpost of the indifference and Anglocentrism we thought we had left behind. The entire record in this case tells the dreary story of Interior's degenerate tenure as trustee delegate for the Indian Trust, a story shot through with bureaucratic blunders, flubs, goofs, and foul-ups, and peppered with scandals, deception, dirty tricks, and outright villainy the end of which is nowhere in sight. And he goes on. But that's all I can read. And shortly after that, the government appealed, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit removed him as the judge assigned to Cobell versus whoever was the secretary at that time.
Because he was biased, that's what they said.
Because he was biased, and so Judge Robertson was appointed to replace him and manage the case for the following set of years. What's your take on Judge Lamberth? Do you feel that having his presence there facilitated or hindered a resolution of this case?
Facilitated. I mean, he was one of the sharpest men that I've ever seen, a judge. Normally you would see, I mean, you know, and I just have to say about the judges that have taken over since, you know, after 10 years of this case, and then all of a sudden you have a new judge, Judge Robertson, trying to catch up of 10 years. You know, it hurt us to have a new judge. But Judge Lamberth remembered everything. I mean, over 10 years, he could recall everything, every testimony. I mean, he was very engaged and a very fair judge. I mean, and he wasn't biased. I mean, you know, he would be as harsh on the plaintiffs as he were on the defendants. The defendants would lie, and that's what got them in trouble. The plaintiffs told the truth, and they, you know, and that's basically what happened is they constantly wanted to lie and deny. And you know, about an accounting, oh yeah, we can do an accounting. In the meantime, they're destroying documents. You know, so I have the highest regard for Judge Lamberth.
My last question, then I'll turn it to the audience for their questions. The settlement was announced in December of 2009, over $3 billion, as Dean Hansen pointed out. There were lots of comments about the number, the size. I know that the plaintiffs were expecting and demanding much more than that. What's your take on the settlement? Do you see it as fair? Do you see it as just?
Well, you've got to take into consideration that Judge Robertson awarded $455 million to the plaintiffs, and of course we appealed. Of course, the government appealed everything, every T that was crossed, and you can't imagine. But when the appellate court came back, they said, well, you know, we just think that, you know, the $455 million, we don't agree with that, but let's do an accounting. That's what the appellate court said. And we'll do not a legal accounting, we'll just go in and the government can do an accounting on low-hanging fruit. And you know what low-hanging fruit meant? Accounts that had 100,000 or more. So that would leave out the majority of individual Indian people. And so we knew what we were up against. And so, you know, it was, I thought that decision was not a good decision. And so, you know, we had to, and then when President Obama came into power, he traveled throughout Indian country, and over he was told that, you know, he needed to settle this case. And so that's what drove us to settlement. You know, I think that, you know, it should be a lot more. We can't even get $3.4 billion through Congress. And it's a difficult time, but at least, you know, I think that given the situations and the timing, is that it's probably as fair as we're going to get with the United States government. You know, $1.4 billion will be distributed to individual Indians. Many of those people that I knew, who I fought this case for, are gone. They've passed away. And that's very, it hurts. It hurts a lot that people have passed away without getting their money. And so, you know, at least this way, a lot of them can get their money. The $2 billion is for buying back highly fractionated airship land on a voluntary basis, that people would be able to sell their land, their fractionated airship land, but in turn it would be turned over to the tribe. So the tribe becomes the winner. It's a win-win situation in that situation. But we wouldn't have had to go to Congress if the government hadn't wanted the $2 billion for the fractionated airship land. We would have taken the portion directly out of the settlement fund. But because the $2 billion, they needed to go through Congress, and so that's what we ended up where we are. And if I might just add a little bit more, the horrible thing that happened to us is they linked us to what is called the Pigford case. It's Pigford 2. It's the black farmers case, which is totally apples and oranges to our case. And there's a lot of people in Congress that, because there's already been a Pigford settlement, Pigford 1, it was supposed to be the final, but this is the second one. So since they linked us to that, there's a lot of people in Congress and the Senate that doesn't like the Pigford case, and it's got a lot of controversy with it. And so that's been a real hassle for us, and we're hoping to be delinked from the Pigford case and in the lame duck session, hopefully get approved.
Okay. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'd like to turn it over to the audience, and I would particularly invite questions from students. So we'll start with any student who has a question for Ms. Cobell. Please raise your hand and someone will bring you the mic. One students. Yes. Joseph.
Hi, I'm Joseph. So is it true that someone else could reopen the case or reopen a similar case to try and get more land and more money?
They can't really reopen this case. This
Yeah.
case will be closed after it's settled. But there's two parts to the case. The accounting portion is the government has admitted we cannot do an accounting. So that's where they're paying everybody $1,000 because they can't do an accounting. The next portion of the case is the trust asset management, where they'll pay X amount of money to individuals, but if individuals feel that they have more in stake than what they're being paid, then they can file their separate cases. But I think it would just be so difficult for an individual Indian to file their own case. I mean, I know how expensive it is, and this case has taken 14 years, and we don't have any lawyers paid. And so I don't know what attorneys are gonna take on a case that you can't get paid for. So it's a difficult case. It was a very, very difficult case. So I think that people will probably have to rethink, if they're gonna file another suit on their own behalf.
I think Tosin had a question right behind Joseph.
My question goes more towards the point you mentioned earlier about your involvement in native banking. And I was wondering, what is your perspective on the effect of capital availability to the development of native economies, especially with regards to individual businesses?
That's a real issue. That's a very good question, because the majority of businesses that are, at least in our different communities that we work in, is they really need equity to start their businesses. And most banks, and including ours, require some equity going into a business and some capital. So it's a difficult area. A lot of people, though, that have started businesses have learned to save so that they have some sort of capital going into their business. The state of Montana has come up with they have an equity grant program that they will actually fund up to $8,000 for somebody that wants to go into business as an equity fund. But it's an area it's very much needed. And maybe that's something that the Tuck School would check out and find out who those people are that would like to invest in, equity because there's a lot of great businesses to be done in Indian country for individuals.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you. First, I'm from Oklahoma, and Mike Salazar was my congressman, and he had the pleasure of campaigning for him growing up. So it was nice to hear you talk about him. He was a great man.
Very great man.
So, from your perspective, what can be done for Indian country to gain the respect of the U.S. government? Do you have any thoughts on how the relationship can?
Well,
be
you know,
improved?
I'm going to speak for individual Indians in the case, this particular case, not for tribes, because there's way more experts in this room about the tribal issues than I am. But as far as individual Indians, I feel that we need to put our trust into receivership. We need to take it away from the Department of Interior. They don't manage money. I mean, you know, look at all the investment people here. You know, would you go put your money into the Department of Interior? You know, just common sense is our history is that we need to get our money out of there, and we need to get our assets, management of our assets out of there as individual Indians. I'm not talking about tribes, because tribes can pretty much do their own thing now. They can manage, but individual Indians, we're stuck with them. And so I would just love for a judge to say, you know, I'm really sick of this, and let's just put them into receivership. Put them all on the bench, and let's get the experts that know how to manage money and trust assets in place. And we can fix it. We can fix this broken system. It's not that hard. All of you guys know this in this room because you're all very smart people, is we can fix it. But we can't fix it under all those career bureaucrats that Mark Grant talked about earlier and everybody else talked about. You can't fix it under that type of environment. You got to have the proper people to fix it. And you know, there's one thing that I'll continue to work on is to push for receivership.
We have time for one more question. Phoebe.
My name's Phoebe Racine. I got so angry when I heard that, was it the head of the Department of the Interior who, under Clinton, ruined those papers, those first-hand accounts? Is it possible to sue him or to sue the Department of the Interior for that? I mean, how do you... I mean, these people are supposed to be leading our country, and we're supposed to have a non-corrupt government, or we would like to have a non-corrupt government. How do we... Sorry, I'm not being very eloquent right now. But how is that handled? How can our leaders get away with that? How do we keep the respect and gain the respect of the U.S. government and the Department of the Interior?
You know, they're not held to the same standards as the private industry, and that's the problem. In the private world, if anything like this would have happened, it would have been closed down. I always call it a bank that's totally out of control. That's basically what we have here. And those officials that you're talking about that, were responsible for the destruction of documents, they were held in contempt of court, and fined $600,000. But guess who paid the $600,000?
The U.S. government.
Us taxpayers, yes. And so it didn't come out of their own pocket. And so I don't think that we can change things until we have some sort of discipline that's put into, just Congress alone. I mean, they're filming this, and I still have to get through the lame duck, but I'm so frustrated with how they work, I'm really frustrated. I think it's just such a broken system that we have that it's just going to take all of you young people to change it. to me, Washington is really broke, and I'm not running for office or anything, but it is, it's broke, and it needs to be fixed. And from Congress to, you know, all the administration, it's, and I don't have an answer, but hopefully that, you know, business schools like this can start figuring it out, because it's like I'll scratch yours back and you scratch mine. That's basically how business is done, and it shouldn't be done like that.
Elouise, perhaps you may not have all the answers, but you certainly have provided an example of how to wage war and speak truth to power. And we're grateful that you spent time with us today. And we have a gift for you on behalf of the Native students at Dartmouth.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. Like Professor Jutu said, on behalf of the student group on campus, Native Americans at Dartmouth, we would like to show Elouise our gratitude for her coming here, and also for Dawson and everyone else for putting this together. It's amazing to have so many bright, intelligent, wonderful Native people all together in a room.
I just wanted to explain the significance of the Pendleton and how it is very important to our Native communities. And the Pendleton is a sign of wealth and is given in honor of great events and more specifically great people. And I think we can all say that as Indian people, we are very appreciative of all the work you've done for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.